We do have a quorum with myself, council members Bradford, Huffman, Nash, Porterfield, Prepty, and Weiner. Pursuant to Section 8-44-112 of the Tennessee Code, annotated time is reserved for public comment on legislative items appearing on this agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak may sign up on the council committee sign-up sheet posted outside the room where the committee is scheduled to meet. Public comment sign-up for council committee meetings will end immediately after or before the meeting begins. Public comment is limited to 8 minutes total at council committee meetings, and each speaker is allowed up to 2 minutes to speak. We do have one person signed up for public comment, Mr. Robert Wenkoop. He is here to speak in opposition to BL 2024-511. So, Mr. Wenkoop, if you'll come to the podium, I will start the timer.
Good afternoon. I'm here to discuss some problems with BL 2024-511, specifically its reliance on 2 court cases, Contributor versus City of Brentwood and Reform America versus City of Detroit, used to justify this legislation. When I examine these, I think that they both provide weak precedents for supporting a proposed buffer zone, and I urge you to consider the flaws in these comparisons. In Contributor versus City of Brentwood, the case involved a sale of newspaper to people in their cars where traffic flow was being obstructed and public safety was compromised. The court upheld restrictions because they directly addressed those safety concerns relating to cars. The key issue in Contributor was traffic disruption, which is far different from peaceful assembly or expression of views that we would expect to happen at a government building like City Hall. So to use this case for restricting access to public buildings, I think conflates traffic safety with general public assembly, which are very different. Second, in Reform America versus City of Detroit, the case is even less applicable. It dealt with protests at privately owned venues, temporarily treated as public forums during the Democratic National Convention. The buffer zones were justified, but they were privately owned venues and not large, and they're not public property or government buildings, which are traditional public forums where the constitutional right to free speech is of its highest protection. The temporary nature of the public forum in Reform America does not translate well to the situation here, which is City Hall, a permanent public forum. Restriction in public forums are held to a much higher standard of scrutiny. And I believe that these buffer zones are unlikely to meet constitutional muster. In both cases, the context and the government interests were very different, and I hope that you will vote against this.
Thank you, Mr. Wenkoop, for coming and speaking to us today. I do have a consent agenda, or proposed consent agenda, so I'll read off the item number, and then I will seek to see if anybody wants to pull any of these items off consent. The first item on our proposed consent agenda is number 1, RS 2024-712. Second item is item number 3, RS 2024-714. Then we have item 4, RS 2024-715. Items 5, RS 2024-716. Item 6, RS 2024-720. Item number 7, RS 2024-721. Item number 8, RS 2024-722. And item number 15, BL 2024-516. And then item number 16, BL 2024-518. Does anyone need any of those items off consent? Council Member Nash, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Number 1, please.
Okay. We'll remove item number 1. Any other items that need to come off the consent agenda? Okay. Then we will go ahead and get started with item number 3, RS 2024-714, Porterfield, Evans, Welsh, and others, accepts a grant from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Board of Health for public safety partnerships in high-impact areas to use available data to identify populations at high risk for adverse consequences from substance abuse and employ evidence-based interventions that are responsive to population needs. Item number 4, RS 2024-715 by Porterfield, Evans, Welsh, and others, accepts a grant from the Friends of Metro Animal Care and Control to the Metropolitan Board of Health to provide funding for emergency medical care, the Safety Net Program, and the Foster Program for shelter animals. Item number 5, RS 2024-716, Porterfield, Evans, and others, approves amendments 6, 7, and 8 to a Community Health Workers for Public Health Response and Resilient grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to the Metropolitan Board of Health to address COVID-19 health disparities in the Nashville area. Item number 6, RS 2024-720, Porterfield, Evans, and others, approves an agreement between the Nashville Fire Department, Emergency Medical Services Division, and Volunteer State Community College to provide clinical experiences for students enrolled in Volunteer State Community College Emergency Medical Services programs. Item number 7, RS 2024-721, Porterfield, Evans, Welsh, and Gadd accepts a grant from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency to the Office of Emergency Management to provide public assistance for damage caused by severe storms during the December 22nd to 27th, 2022 Presidential Disaster Declaration number FEMA-4691-DR-TN. Item number 8, RS 2024-722 by Porterfield, Evans, and Gadd approves Amendment 1 to a grant from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency to the Metro Office of Emergency Management to provide resources for hazardous materials, hazmat preparedness. Item number 15, BL 2024-516, Bradford, Porterfield, Evans, and others, an ordinance approving the second amendment to a lease agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County and Nashville Metropolitan LLC for office space at 1281 Murfreesboro Pike. And item number 16, BL 2024-518 by Porterfield, Evans, and others, approves an agreement between the Nashville Fire Department, Emergency Medical Services Division, and Vanderbilt University Medical Center to provide clinical educational experiences for VUMC house staff and graduate medical education programs. Do I have a motion? All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right, we recommend approval on those items. 7 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. All right, so we'll go back and pick up item number 1, RS 2024-712 by Sepulveda, a resolution modifying the requirements for a seat on the Board of Trustees of the Hospital Authority of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. Okay, I understand Councilmember Prepty is signing on to that bill, so do I have a motion? Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded. I will recognize Councilmember Prepty as soon as I can find your microphone. Here we go. You're recognized.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, this resolution simply amends an ordinance code to permit for or substituting the requirements for an individual to serve on the Hospital Authority Board. Essentially, what it does is it will remain that 3 members of the board will be medical doctors, so somebody who has an MD, but it will also provide for a pathway for somebody who has specialized training, higher training, and has a PhD that is a doctor, but not necessarily a medical doctor, but is still qualified to be able to serve on the Hospital Authority Board. And so with that, Madam Chair, I renew the motion.
All right. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. Let me recognize Councilmember Weiner.
This is in relation to the question, the comment that you made regarding a PhD. What about a clinical audiologist that has a doctorate in audiology, an AUD?
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Prepty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe an audiologist would still meet the qualification. So what it specifically states is that one member having special training, practice, and experience in fields of psychiatric medicine or psychology, one registered nurse, and the remaining members chosen without reference to occupation or profession. So regardless, an audiologist could potentially serve on this board or commission.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Weiner. Any other questions on this item? Looks like Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question, I think that there is support for broadening the type of person and that there is probably a need for someone with expertise in mental health because that's something that's dealt with. But I would also think that that there are other specialties. Does anybody know what the background is and why that particular specialty is called out as opposed to others? And then I have a second unrelated question.
Sure. Do we want someone from the former council member Rosenberg? Hang on just a second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Councilmember Prepti referred to, this allows a psychologist to serve. Right, currently, there's a mental health seat on the hospital authority, but it has to be a doctor of psychiatric medicine. It cannot be somebody that has outstanding expertise and training in psychology. This allows just an option there.
All right, Councilmember Allen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So my question is, I mean, diabetes is also not a big issue, but we're not asking for an endocrinologist or a cardiologist, which are also big health issues. So I just wondered why that particular specialty and no others is required. Do we know the history of that? I mean, obviously that's been on there for a while and there was a reason.
Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you. I do not know the history of it, and we haven't. The working group has not gotten into the larger board. This
Right.
is an issue around one seat, kind of like what we did with music, film, and entertainment, in adjusting the requirements to enable a psychologist to serve there.
Thank you. I think that makes sense. I would just throw out, this seems to be an issue where we talk about the administration and the finances of hospitals. So maybe when y'all get back to talking about that, if you want to talk about whether also a hospital administration position would be, they seem to have always done it, but maybe formalizing that might be useful. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to that point, if I may, the survey data that we got back from members was a request for more financial expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Any other questions? Councilmember Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess I'm a little concerned, and psychology and psychiatry are related, but they're not the same. And I know there's been my past psychiatrists being somewhat critical of some of the practices of psychologists. So I was wondering, and I guess you've answered it. I was wondering if the hospital was in favor of this, the board, and what drove the decision.
Mr. Rosenberg.
We have not gotten, council member, any level of concern about it from the hospital or the authority itself. The rationale now relates to an appointment that is happening tonight. We were advised in a wide-ranging conversation that if we don't have a board with all of the defined seats filled, then we could be positioned where the board cannot operate. There's currently a psychologist with an awful lot of experience, training, and prowess, both psychology and in health equity for that matter, who can fill that seat and would be exceptional. And this would allow that to happen and not leave the board in limbo.
Councilmember Nash.
Thank you.
All right, any other committee member questions? All right, Councilmember Prepti.
Renew my motion.
All right, we've got a motion on the floor. No additional discussion. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right. 7 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. Oh, yes, thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 2, RS 2024-713, Porterfield, Evans, Welsh, and others. This accepts a grant from the Tennessee Department of Human Services to the Metropolitan Board of Health to conduct immunization record audits for child care centers, drop-in centers, and group child care homes to ensure the safety and well-being of children and families in Tennessee. Do I have a motion? Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded. I have a question, and so I wanted to not put this on consent because of my question. Is our representative from MPHD here? And if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Kabara Leach. I'm the Chief Health Strategist for the Public Health Department.
Thank you for being here. So a couple of questions that I had received that I thought I would ask publicly that I thought were relevant. So can you just walk through a little bit about related to these immunization audits and kind of what is the trigger for us going through this process of having these audits?
Well, it's mainly for like compliance and the safety of children in our schools and our daycares to make sure that their parents are up to date and that we can connect them to care if their children are not up to date. So it's acting sort of like a little bit of care coordination to assist parents and the daycares with making sure that their children have like their TDAPs, that they're on their regular or recommended schedule per, the CDC, the Department of Health, and so on.
And then have you had to go through an immunization audit before?
That I do not know. We are the ones auditing. We're not being audited.
Right, exactly. But have you had to conduct an immunization audit before?
I'm not sure aware of that, but I can check in with our people that do handle the audits.
Okay, that sounds good. And then do you have any insight at this point, like what happens if a child is exempt from being immunized kind of as part of this process?
That there is no discussion of exemptions. I believe that we would respect those exemptions as long as they satisfy, the tenets of the law. But right now, for the most part, these aren't people that we're dealing with who are looking for exemptions. They're actively seeking the services and being referred to us.
Okay. And then the last question was around the mature minor doctrine, and if there's any connection or if this is a hindrance, I guess, to kind of this process, especially for foster children.
No, it would not be.
Okay. How about any other questions from anybody? I'm not seeing anybody. All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to renew the motion on this one. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right. So we've got 8 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. Okay, I do not see the sponsor for our next item, RS 2024-728. So we'll move it to the heel of our agenda. And we will go ahead and we will pick up the next item, item number 10, BL 2024-469 by Prep T, Porterfield, Toombs, and others, men's chapters 2.44, 2.28, and 2.222 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws pertaining to criminal participation and related actions of employees of the Metropolitan Government. Do I have a motion? All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. I'll recognize Councilmember Prepty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and colleagues. Thank you all so much for everybody who's engaged in this work and this topic. I want to give a special thanks to the Metro agencies that have been working with me on this: Metro Legal, MNPD, NFD, the Sheriff's Office. This bill has been the culmination of weeks upon weeks of work, and so there's still a considerable ways to go. But I think that we are definitely in a really good place. There are a couple of things that I want to note with this bill to address some of the concerns that have been raised. First and foremost, want to recognize that what this bill will do is this will bolster a lot of what these departments have in place. What we're doing is codifying our principles and codifying in ensuring that we're codifying the principles of non-discrimination, making sure that these bad actors that we know that are targeting government agencies are not able to take a foothold. So this bill will be able to bolster what is already in place and ensure that we are on a trajectory and on the right path. So that's first and foremost. So I'm grateful again to all the Metro agencies, grateful to MNPD for the work that they've done on this bill and the things that they already have in place. Grateful to the fire department for the work that they've done and what's already in place. And again, thank you to each and every single one of the council members who have engaged very, very deeply on this. By way of movement, Madam Chair, I do want to note that there are a number of substitutes and amendments that have been filed. I would articulate that I am in support of the amendment filed by Councilmember Allen, and think that it's appropriate for us to have a conversation about where we're wanting to go with this bill, and providing an opportunity before this body to do so. So with that being said, and expressing my support for Councilmember Allen's bill, I'm gonna sit down and be quiet and provide an opportunity for other members of the body to express what they wish on this bill before I make a subsequent motion.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Prepty. I saw Councilmember Weiner's hand first, so we'll go with Councilmember Weiner.
Thank you so much, Chair. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate Councilmember Prepty for bringing to our attention the need for protection against hate in general. And there's no place for that. And so for the basis of his ordinance, I fully support it. I would hope that nobody else objects to it. And understanding that any Metro employee's participation in any kind of hate that is directed at anyone else or any entity, it has zero place in our society anytime, for any reason, and such disengagement is discriminatory, and it's also unfair for the constituents of Davidson County. We do our best to present legislation that's comprehensive and doesn't require future Band-Aids to fix things that we didn't address. Think how many times we had to go back and fix the STR legislation. Things how many times that we're having to tweak public comment. And now, again, thanks to Councilmember Suara. And those are good things. But if we have an opportunity to address some big issues that are not being addressed right now with anything that's been presented, I think it serves us well to step back and take a second look. And some of those examples would be, what if in the age of artificial intelligence, somebody decides to create an alternate website, a social media profile, and or posts or reports videos that depict anybody in this room, for that matter, any of our Metro employees, board and commission members, in any way that's not true, that's defamatory, setting anyone up for false accusations. We haven't yet addressed the impact and or the management of artificial intelligence. What happens if this occurs before a procedure is in place for managing the bad actors? They've really violated the scope of either of the proposed ordinances or the substitutes, and we haven't addressed the verifications or the logistics yet. What's the remedy or the penalty for violation? While we do have civil service protections in place and rules in place, not all of our Metro employees are governed by those civil service rules, so we need to cover that. In conclusion, I would hate to build something that ensnares the innocent while not comprehensively managing the bad actors in a meaningful way. Therefore, I am going to request, let me do it now. Want to wait? Okay. So we need to focus with Metro Legal on the questions that are being asked and make sure that we have a product that addresses the issue fairly and comprehensively. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Weiner. Councilmember Bradford, hold on just a second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. This question, I'm going to direct to the sponsor first, but if Ms. Darby has any to add on to that, I'll welcome that. You know, we've heard a lot of discussions, and one of my first questions when this was drafted was, why was only MNPD called out? And my question then was, why don't we make it metro-wide? My understanding now is that there's certain constitutional or legal implications on doing that. So I wonder if the sponsor could kind of speak a little bit to why initially it was done that way.
Councilmember Prepty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to my colleague for this question. So in working on this bill, we've expanded it to all, it's as a substitute that we voted on last meeting, it's been expanded to all public safety institutions here in Nashville, Davidson County. And the reason for it specifically honing in on public safety is because of the constitutional line of cases under the Connick-Pickering balancing test. When examining First Amendment restrictions on government employees, what the courts look at is the interest of the government agency, the interest of the employee, as well as the specific role that institution or that government agency plays. So if you look at the inherent role that public safety institutions play in keeping us all safe, And this specific restriction, as it relates to really, these restrictions don't pull in First Amendment protected activity. But when looking at that Connick-Pickering balancing test, that's part of the reason why it was narrowly tailored, was to ensure that it is looking at the specific role of those government agencies and not being overly broad. Because if it's too overly broad, and we are exposing Metro to broader litigation that might not be defensible before the courts. The Middle District, the Sixth Circuit, as well as the Supreme Court, has reaffirmed the Connick-Pickering test time and time again. And so looking at those constitutional line of cases was specifically why this bill was tailored in on public safety institutions. But I'm proud of the work that we've been doing to expand it in a constitutional manner.
Thank you, Councilmember Prepty. Councilmember Bradford.
Yes, a follow-up on that. Do you see any issues? And we're kind of now looking at expanding the scope of who's being covered by this. If we approve any of the substitutes that make this Metro-wide, does that, in a sense, make this bill moot? Because now we've basically passed something that we cannot defend in court.
Councilmember Prepty.
And I'm going to give an answer, but then I'm also going to pass it to Metro Legal if they want any input on this. But specifically with some of the substitutes, so with a substitute that I have filed that expands these provisions to all of Metro. Again, if you look at the specific language in this bill, we are not encompassing or going after First Amendment protected speech. So being a part of a criminal conspiracy is not protected by the First Amendment. Conspiring to engage in acts of domestic terrorism, because let's be frank, the definition encompasses domestic terrorist groups, is not protected by the First Amendment. So it is my belief, based off of the research that I've done and the language that we have here, that this would not expose Metro to any greater legal liability. On that note, I will say, I think it is important for us as a body, as a society, to be able to take a stand and say that the specific types of activity and groups that are defined in this legislation have no place in our government. And if we have to litigate that, I think that is something that we should be willing to do, because we need to make sure that our citizens have faith in our public institutions and that we are doing every single thing that we can to keep everybody in our society safe. And if Metro Legal wants to add anything onto that, I'll pose a question through the chair.
Is there anyone from? Okay, let me turn that table on. Thank you. Is it? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Fox from Metro Legal. I agree with Councilman Prepty that it's constitutional to apply this across the board to all Metro employees. I think that the 4 substitutes all have slightly different language, and our office would like to look at all that different language and get the language right. You know, is it knowingly? Is it participate? I think we'd like a chance to get to fine tune that language. But we agree that doing it across the board prohibition is not going to be a legal problem.
Thank you. Councilmember Bradford.
Thank you. This should be my last question, but it came up in the sponsor's last comments. So basically what this bill would do is, we're not really saying you cannot be a member of one of these groups and be a part of Metro, but if you start conspiring to do stuff, or you do commit crimes, then that's when you get basically caught by this law. Is that a correct understanding, or are we saying you cannot be involved, period, with one of these groups?
Councilmember Prepty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we look at the specific language, it's knowingly participate. So you have to have the mens rea, the state of mind of knowing that this is what is going on and that you are knowingly participating and taking part in it. So again, if we look at the specific language, it states, it defines hate group as any person or group that incites or provides material support for criminal acts or criminal conspiracies that promote violence towards racial, religious, ethnic, sexual, gender, or other groups or classes of individuals. And then paramilitary gang is defined as a person or group that advocates the overthrow of the United States government or any state, municipal, tribal, or other government by force or violence or any unlawful means, including as defined under Tennessee Code annotated section 3917.314. So it's going towards that knowingly participate. So if there is some kind of nefarious group that that individual knows is engaged in prohibited criminal activities or unprotected criminal activities, and they knowingly participate or knowingly provide material support, which is a legal term of art, then they would run afoul of these provisions. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Bradford. Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions for a few various people in the room. The first one will be directed at the sponsor, just to for everybody to get it on the record here. In your substitute, the first line we changed to signify that it would apply to all Metro employees. As you continue down through the preamble, there's still some call outs regarding public safety. Could you just walk us through why you left that part in?
Councilmember Prepty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I think it's important for us to specifically be legislating based off of fact and data. There has been countless hours of both legal and factual research by our intelligence agencies, by our federal law enforcement partners, as well as numerous think tanks and other non-governmental agencies that these recitations are directly pulled from. So they're direct citations. So that's the reason why they're left in there, because it directly demonstrates part of the threat that we are trying to address that these other agencies and other entities have identified and that we know are a direct threat to the safety and security of our society.
Okay.
Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you for that explanation. Much appreciated. I guess my only comment before I move to my next question on that, sir, is just if you do have somebody with nefarious intentions in another department, and I'm going to use an example that's very familiar with me in my world, database administrators. So no offense to anybody at home that's a database administrator. Typically that is a position that is behind the scenes, right? That's someone that typically will live in a little bit more online than the average person, and they can sometimes get a little bit radicalized, to say the least. That individual could also wreak potential havoc. Just curious your comments on that.
Yeah, so what we know is that there are a number of pipelines of radicalization, and that there are institutions that are engaged in the practices of attempting to de-radicalize individuals. De-radicalization work is difficult, and it is almost impossible to provide empirical data and track on. And so understanding that the recitation of the threats that have been identified might not necessarily be fully comprehensive. That does not mean that we cannot continue to seek to ensure good governance across the board, which I think that this entire process has demonstrated a willingness, ability, and a desire to engage in a substantive, meaningful process to do exactly that, which is part of the reason why I proposed my second substitute, which is within this amendment package. And so I recognize that those are issues that I believe this bill and this subsequent substitute will directly address.
Thank you, Councilmember Prepty. Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Chair. And just one more comment to the sponsor, and I think this is a direct quote, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So you just stated a conspiracy to participate in a criminal act such as that's covered in this is not covered under the First Amendment. That's accurate. Yep. So if we're going down that road, I guess that's where I'm getting at. It makes more sense that it is applicable to all of us as a Metro employee. Yep.
Councilmember Prepty.
Yes.
Awesome. And I just had a couple of clarifying questions for Chief Gilder, if that's okay. Just
Yes.
really quickly.
Deputy Chief Gilder, you're recognized.
Thank you.
Deputy Chief, in the last meeting, Councilmember Prepty had highlighted an incident. I can't remember the specifics about it, but essentially there was an incident within MNPD where someone participated to some level in this behavior. Just curious if you could speak to that and also what MNPD's response to that incident was.
Honestly, I don't recall the exact circumstances that were proffered. If you refresh my recollection, I might.
Councilmember Prepty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief Gilder, for being here. The specific, and you might not recall this, the specific instance that I referenced, and I cannot remember the officer's name. It was an individual who had been hired by MNPD, but it was subsequently discovered that he had been participating in sort of your traditional idea of a criminal gang, drug running, things like that, and had been utilizing MNPD resources to essentially target rival gangs and provide information to individuals within the gang that he was a member of. What happened as a result of that was that he was decommissioned, fired, and prosecuted by the district attorney's office. And so in that was in response to a question from Councilmember Druffel as it related to the sort of statutes that were presently in place that address specifically our traditional notion of a criminal gang or cartel. But again, there's nothing across the nation like this ordinance that specifically addresses the threats that we're faced by these specific kinds of groups.
Deputy Chief.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do recall now what you're talking about. I was thinking in the context of like hate groups and things of that nature. Yeah, as I recall, there was an employee who had misused their access to resources within the police department to collect information related to a criminal organization, and as a result, they were decommissioned. I believe they were fired. I don't think they resigned before they were fired, but I'd have to go back and check the records on that.
You recall what year that was?
I don't remember the exact year. I want to say it's been it was pre-COVID, which is how you remember things now. So probably 15 to 18, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And just one more question, and this is for Metro Legal, and this is my last one, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Just in regards to the precedent here, could Metro Legal comment on any other city or municipality that has implemented any law such as this?
Director Fox.
Yes, Laura Fox from Metro Legal. We're not aware of any other city that has a law like this.
Okay, thank you. Oh, looks like Councilmember Nash.
Hang on a minute. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess I'm trying to look back of the events of the past maybe year. January 6th, we saw, I think, at least some of those members of these paramilitary groups attack our Capitol. And there were some policemen, but I suspect there was also the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, and a few others. And I'm struck here that our committee now is the Safety and Health Committee, because we saw how related they all were to safety. I applaud the different authors now kind of assuming that everybody has the potential to be picked on by one of these groups and recruited. And I think it's just important that the folks, NDOT, who's enforcing our parking, the health department, provide services without bias and the like. And I have some concern that we're even talking about a particular group, because there's a number of groups that can have biases that we would want our police officers, firefighters, public works people associated with. It's not their association so much as the conduct. And I think if we can keep, and I think several of the substitutes have done that, are relying on the conduct of the employee. And I mean, as I stood here, we've had groups that support Palestinians, calling the Jewish folks everything but sons of God. We have Jewish folks that are concerned about the Palestinians and their raid, and I've seen the hyperbole around those groups and their discussions. So I would just caution us about going too deep down the well, talking about groups, and keep it focused on making sure our Metro employees don't start being involved in that behavior.
Let me catch Councilmember Prepty, and then we'll get Councilmember Porterfield.
I'll yield to Councilmember Porterfield.
Okay. Then Councilmember Porterfield, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to very gently, I just want to remind us that we need to be careful when we're making kind of generalized statements, especially around conflicts that are happening that are just very sensitive topics. And I don't want anyone viewing this to think that council members that are supporting Palestinians are saying negative things about Jewish people, or that our Jewish colleagues are saying negative things about Palestinian people. I'm sure that wasn't the intent of the council member. I'm going to assume that wasn't the intent of the council member. But for anyone that is viewing, I just want to be very clear that all of us that have been vocal, because we've had people vocal on both sides of this issue, and we're not disparaging each other. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
Thank you, Councilmember Porterfield. Councilmember Prepty.
Before I make my statement, is there anybody else, I'm about to make a motion, is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this? Councilmember Allen? No. Okay, so first and foremost, thank you all so much for this discussion. I'm very encouraged by it. Again, I think this is the reason why we're all here, is to engage in this robust, meaningful dialogue. With that being said, Madam Chair, I would like to move for a 2-meeting deferral on this.
All right, we have a motion for a 2-meeting deferral. Do we have a second? All those in favor of a 2-meeting deferral, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Sorry.
Councilmember Prepty.
Can I amend my motion to a 2-meeting deferral with a re-referral back to committee?
Oh, it'll automatically be referred. How about that?
Well, look at that.
Okay, so all those in favor of a 2-meeting deferral?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right, thank you. You recommend a 2-meeting deferral with a re-referral back to committee. All right, thank you for that discussion. We're going to keep going. We're going to move on to BL 2024-509 by Evans Siegel, Swara, and others. Amends Chapter 10.24 and 6.64 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws to restrict the solicitation or distribution of handbills on private property to daylight hours. Do I have a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. We're going to go, first of all, I guess, can I send it over to Ms. Darby for an explanation before we do have a little discussion?
This bill would restrict the non-commercial solicitation or distribution of handbills to residences being distributed during daylight hours. The end time of that would be 7 p.m. or or sunset, whichever occurs later. So after the time changes in November, or I guess it could be, no, it's always in November. After the time changes in November, the distribution could occur after daylight hours, but the cutoff would definitely be 7 p.m.
All right, I saw Councilmember Porterfield's hand first, so we'll take Councilmember Porterfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify if this, I think I got an answer, but I want to clarify if this if this also covers like political campaigns, when people are out door knocking for political campaigns, and also like right now we have the transit campaign that's happening. So if people are out knocking on doors, does this impact that?
Yes, it would. It's essentially content neutral, so it would affect all solicitations and distributions of handbills.
Thank
through
you.
Daylight hours.
Does it also impact if people leave something? So, and I'm just using transit because it's happening right now. So like if, not that transit's doing this, but transit is a campaign right now. So like if someone like left a flyer on your door, they didn't knock on your door and you weren't there, but they left a flyer on your door about this community Easter egg hunt or a community meeting or anything of that nature, this would also impact that, even if you don't like make contact with the person, you're just like leaving it at their door after dark.
I believe that it would if it's after dark or after 7 p.m., whichever is later.
Okay. All right. I'm going to sit with that a little more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councilmember Porterfield definitely hit on all my questions there. I had one quick follow-up with that, and it really pertains around that 7 o'clock hour. So, just a hypothetical here. I'm out knocking on doors to promote my community Easter egg hunt. Is there a fining policy that would be implemented with this, or what would that look like?
Director Darby.
The legislation does include specifically a penalty of a $50 fine. That $50 fine is set by the Tennessee Constitution, so it cannot go any higher than that, and the penalty is per day.
Who will enforce that? Is it codes, the police? Do we know?
I don't know. I think it could be codes or police.
Yeah, I'm looking and I don't see who it's not explicit.
It's not explicit in the legislation. It would be whichever entity is charged with enforcing those codes. So it could be codes or it could be police. I think this is in the public safety section. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So codes or police potentially. How about any other discussion on this one? Councilmember Bradford.
Thank you. Following up on this thread of conversation, situation that's kind of come to my mind too is, all right, so say someone, whether it's a neighborhood organization, someone running for office, they come to your door during the day before 7 p.m. You're not there. They leave their phone card or handbill at your door, but you come home after dark or after 7 and see that there. How do we kind of judge, or is there a way to kind of prevent people from maybe making inaccurate or wrongful accusations about someone may have broken this law by, because they didn't see it until after the deadline?
So, well, I guess I'll speak to this first. So I don't know that there would be a way, if you've got something like Ring doorbell, if you're approaching somebody that has Ring doorbell, or obviously they're going to have like date and time information on there. If you're a political campaign, you're going to be using a tool that's going to allow you to be able to note, like, when are you dropping information at someone's door. So it's really going to be based on, were you physically there, leaving your handbill after 7 o'clock or not. And so I think if that is the law and the rule that we're going by, of course, it kind of like the AI conversation, that we were having before, is there the potential that somebody could accuse you and it not be true? Possibly.
Okay, thank you.
How about any other discussion? Okay. It looks like Councilmember Allen, you've got a question.
Thank you, man. No, I just want to throw into this. I mean, I think what we would not like to see is waking up in the morning and seeing a bunch of things spread on everybody's lawn that is hateful. And this gives us a tool to say that that should not happen. That seems useful.
Yes, that is definitely true. Any other discussion or questions? All right, all those in favor of this item, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? Okay, you recommend approval. All right, we'll move on to item number 12. This is BL 2024-510 by Prep T. Evans, Evan Siegel, and other. Amends section 11.12.040 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws regarding exemptions for wearing disguises in public places. Do we have a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilmember Prep T.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, briefly, what this specific bill does is it amends the current statute just to provide a pathway for folks to be able to continue wearing masks for medical reasons, so any kind of medical device, as well as any kind of face covering that that is a part of their religion for their sincerely held religious beliefs, which is a legal term of art. I just want to point out for this body that similar kinds of statutes have been upheld, most recently in the Second Circuit in Church of the American Knights of the Ku Klux Klan versus the Commissioner of the New York City Police Department. So this really is just a cleanup to ensure that folks are able to continue to practice freely and fairly their religion without the prospect of prosecution, as well as ensuring that people can continue to wear masks for medical reasons. And so with that, I renew my motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Prep T. Is there any discussion on this item? All right, seeing no discussion. It looks like, I was going to say, let me get Councilmember Kimbrough first, and then we'll go Councilmember Nash to you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, I guess for Mr.
Prep-T.
Mr. Prep-T, I was just wondering, with the mask for medical reasons, so the assumption is if you have on that typical medical mask, you're not to be approached. Is that right? By anybody that's going to enforce that law?
Councilmember Prep-T.
So yes, there's a specific, so what the language of the bill does provides that specific exception. Essentially, the short answer is no, you should not have this ordinance enforced against you if you are simply just wearing a medical, like surgical mask.
Wait a minute. I think my question is there something, so you can still be approached, hostage, you could be asked about it, like, why do you have on that mask? Is that, or is it that whoever's going to enforce that law is not to approach, or that's not suspicious to have on a mask? That's what I'm asking. Is this?
Yeah, so if there is no reasonable suspicion for an enforcement action against an individual who is simply just wearing a mask, wearing a mask won't provide reasonable suspicion or probable cause for enforcement, if that makes sense.
All right.
Thank you, Councilmember Kimbrough. Councilmember Nash. Oh, hang on a second. There you go.
Thank you. Does this affect Halloween?
Councilmember Prep-T.
This does not affect Halloween. So again, this is a code that we currently have on our books right now here in Metro Nashville. This was actually something that was enacted back in 1949, and the specific purpose of its previous enactment was to combat the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And so within the ordinance as it's currently written, there's a specific carve out for Halloween and other things like that.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. Or I'm sorry, anybody else have any other questions on this one or discussion? Okay. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right, thank you. You recommend approval. Okay, we're moving on to BL 2024-511, Evans, Siegel, Parker, Evans, and others. Amends Chapter 11.12 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws to create buffer zones to maintain public safety around public buildings and parking lots. Do I have a motion? Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded. I do have a letter from Councilmember Evans Siegel to approve. Any discussion on this item? Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important, just based on conversation that we had earlier, to point out that even though the caption says this is a buffer bill, it is not a buffer bill. It is a bill that prohibits obstructing the entrance to a public building. And I think that's very different from inhibiting the ability to peacefully protest and gather at a public building. And I think it's just really important for people that are listening and watching that have concerns about what sounds like creating some 50-foot buffer around buildings, that it does not do that. It just prohibits someone from trying to obstruct someone from entering a public building, because we want all people to be able to do that.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. How about any other questions? I see Councilmember Bradford.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So just so that it's on the record, you know, we've heard some concerns from the public about how this could potentially impact other gatherings. And so just wondering if the administration can, again, kind of speak about how this wouldn't impact other forms of gatherings. Like, say, CWA wanted to kind of parade through downtown in support of their strike. And would this impact their ability to do that? If they could just kind of elaborate on that.
Ms. Fox or Director Deeds. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilman, for the question. This bill does not affect any normal protest, any march, any striking workers who are trying to march. All it does is to makes it unlawful for somebody to knowingly block or prevent somebody from entering or leaving a government building, or intimidating them through speech not to enter or leave a government building. So it will have no impact on the protests that happen on the public square or even Diane Nash. There will just need to be a corridor for people to come and go from the building. That's all this does. And I think there's a misconception about what buffer zone really refers to. Typically, in these kinds of cases, a buffer zone is where you have two very strongly held opinions, people on one side, people on another side, and you create a little separation between them to avoid physical violence. There's no intent in this bill, and nothing in this bill comes close to saying that there will be a buffer zone that will prevent people from lawfully protesting on our public square. That's available, it has been, and it will be.
Thank you for that clarification. No more questions.
All right, thank you. Anybody else have any additional questions or discussion on this item? All right. Let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor of this item, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right, you recommend approval. All right, item number 14, BL 2024-512, Toombs, Parker, Evans, and others. Amend section 12.12.170 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws to prohibit the placement of unauthorized signs, signals, or markings over a highway. I do have a letter to approve. Do I have a motion?
Move.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. Councilmember Porterfield, did you want to speak to this since you were involved?
Thank you, Chair. Just asking that people support, and I will defer any questions to Metro Legal.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Porterfield. Any discussion on this item? Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Chair. Not really sure who this question goes to. Unfortunately, maybe NDOT, and I don't think anybody's in the room. Oh, there we go. It's around the right of way. I know that in Metro we have a law on the books today that states that you can't put a sign in the right of way. It's not really typically enforced or really maintained that well, but it's there. And I'm curious how that affects over a highway or a highway bridge, and if that's considered the right of way.
All right, Mr. Purvis.
Thank you, Chair. Matt Purvis, the Council Liaison for the Department of Transportation. I think they work pretty hand in hand. It just typically right of way over highways are kind of in the gray area between state versus local right of way. So actually dealing with the situations would depend a lot on the road, whatever overpass it is. If it is local, a local overpass, local roadway over a highway, which is state, we would be in charge of enforcing that or working with TDOT to make sure that it's enforced. There's a lot of coordination needed between the two departments, but that's a very normal process for us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Purvis. Mr. Huffman, any more questions? All right, any other questions or discussion on this item? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right, you recommend approval. Okay, we're going to go back up to item number 9. This is RS 2024-728, Styles, Suara, Toombs, and others. This is a resolution requesting the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department implement a zero tolerance policy for sexual misconduct. Do I have a motion? All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. We do have a couple of sponsors here, and it looks like Councilmember Porterfield, you would like to speak first, so let me go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I signed on as a sponsor to this legislation, and I did just want to call to our attention that there was a late filed a late filed amendment that we just got emailed to us about 30 minutes ago. So would it be proper for me to move the amendment, Madam Chair?
Sure, that sounds good.
I would like to move the amendment.
All right, would you like to describe the amendment?
Yes, in the original resolution, the organization Silent No Longer Tennessee was referenced as Silent No More. So what this does is strike out the word more. So instead of saying Silent No More, it now says Silent No Longer Tennessee. And then also it is saying that the CRB will put the well-being and safety of Metropolitan employees and citizens. So it is, failure to implement a formal zero tolerance policy as suggested by the CRB will put the well-being and safety of Metro employees and citizens at risk. So it's just adding the word citizens in addition to Metro employees.
Thank you, Councilmember Porterfield. We have an amendment. All those in favor of this amendment? Anyone opposed? Anyone not voting? All right. You recommend approval of the late filed amendment. So we'll go back to the resolution as amended. I know Councilmember Bradford, you are a co-sponsor. Councilmember Porterfield, you are a co-sponsor. Some of the other co-sponsors have already left to move on to other committees. Do either of you want to speak to the content of the resolution? Councilmember Porterfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll speak to it. In essence, this is asking that MNPD implements a zero tolerance policy for sexual misconduct. We've heard from speakers that have come and shared, their experience. It is my understanding that MNPD may already have a policy. This is enhancing that policy is my understanding, and that it's asking the department to pass a policy that is similar to the recommendation that the Community Review Board made. I do know that the Community Review Board has done extensive research on this. They've worked with national partners to make sure that they're able to bring a solid product, and we're just asking MNPD to partner with them and pass this.
Thank you, Councilmember Porterfield. Since the prime sponsor is not here, I would like to give Deputy Chief Gilder you an opportunity to share some information kind of related to the current policy you have, the sense related to the proposed policy, and any additional information you'd like to add. So Deputy Chief Gilder.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, I would start out by saying that we do actually have a zero tolerance policy currently, and we've had one. Our policy is available online. It's been on our website. All our policies are. They have been since about 2018. Our harassment and discrimination policy, the policy that contains the sexual harassment prohibitions, is about 19 pages long, so it's pretty thorough. We have folks that are going through the recommendations that were made, so I can't speak just yet because we didn't get the policy sent to us until a couple weeks ago after it was announced publicly. So I can't speak to what the differences are, but I do know that we were asked for a copy of our policy on August 6th of this year. So I'm not sure how much of our policy was incorporated or reviewed as a part of that policy. So I can't speak to those distinctions between the two just yet. There are also civil service policies on sexual harassment. There's a mayor's executive order on sexual harassment, and our policy comports with that, comports with state and federal law with respect to sexual harassment. So that's what I would
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Chief Gilder. Any other discussion on this item? Councilwoman Johnston, you're recognized.
Thank you. Since I'm not on the committee, I would defer. Okay, thank you, Councilman Huffman. I just wanted to ask legal because in the proposed policy, they use the term sexual misconduct, which is incredibly broad from what I've figured out, but I'm not a lawyer. Can you speak to the sort of dangers that you get into when you have a policy around such a broad term and really serious consequences related to that?
Is that Director Dietz? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Council Member Wally Dietz. Let me say first, no Metro client has asked the Department of Law to review this policy. We have not reviewed it. So I start with that. As a general matter, terms, especially anything in the criminal law or in a personnel handbook, needs to be very carefully defined so that the personnel know where the lines are. I cannot speak to whether or not there are some words that have overly broad definitions because, frankly, I have not looked at it.
So with that being said, since it probably should be reviewed by Metro Legal, if you were to have a desired time frame in order to have your staff be able to properly review the proposed policy, how long would you ask for that deferral if there was to be one made?
Thank you again. What would be important is to have time to review the policy, review existing MMPD policy, maybe do a compare document, and then look at applicable law. So I would say we would need at least 2 meeting deferral to accomplish that assignment.
Okay, I'm not on the committee, so I can't make that. So I will let someone else.
Oh, sorry for cutting you off there. Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Dietz, for that helpful tidbit there. I want to be clear, sexual misconduct in any form or fashion is not acceptable, and we need to treat it as such. But what we're looking at is a self-described overly broad topic here in language on a singular department. And I just want us to ensure that if we're going to do this, that we do it the right way. With that, I move for a 2-meeting deferral.
We have a 2-meeting deferral motion. Do we have a second? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of a 2-meeting deferral? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we can have some discussion on the deferral motion. Councilmember Porterfield, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'll just be very brief. One thing that I wanted to highlight, and I wanted to highlight this because this may or may not impact people's decision on a deferral. To be clear, this does not say that MNPD has to implement the exact policy that the CRB recommended. It does ask that they implement a zero tolerance policy for sexual misconduct that's in line with policy recommendations that are set forth, that were set forth by the Community Review Board. So this is asking that they are looking at the recommendations that were put forth and making sure that those recommendations or that there's policy that's in line with that. So if there are concerns, legal will still have the opportunity to review that. MNPD will still have the opportunity to review that. I can't speak on behalf of the sponsor. I can only speak on behalf of myself, but I would be hopeful that all of our Metro government entities could work together on this and that our CRB and our MNPD and our Metro legal team could work together, because I believe that we all have the same goal of making sure that employees and constituents are safe. And I believe that all of those departments would have that same goal. So I would hope that we all could work together on this.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Porterfield. I would really appreciate a collaborative resolution on this between all the parties, ultimately, so that way we end up with something that is clear, enforceable, potentially, aligning with culture change. And so I really appreciate that sentiment. And so with that, any other discussion on this particular item? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of a 2-meeting deferral? Anyone opposed? 1, 2, 2 opposed. Anyone not voting? All right, you recommend a 2-meeting deferral. Those are all of our legislative items. I do have a couple of items for our departments. In particular, Deputy Chief Gilder, would you mind coming up and I requested some information, if you wouldn't mind sharing with the committee what I requested and some of that detail.
Sure. So you had asked briefly, we had announced publicly a couple of times in different locations that we do have gun locks available for the public. Obviously, access to firearms is a safety issue and unauthorized access to them. And so the department makes available at all our precincts, at headquarters and at records, access to gun locks. They're similar to these. They vary in functionality, but in large part, they're pretty simple. You basically, like this one, you just run it down the barrel through the action, you lock it, and you take the key with you, and that prevents children and others from having access to the firearm and being able to use it. The other, and I'm happy to take questions about that as well, but the other item that you wanted me to speak on, I actually brought Deputy Chief Keith Stevens with me. He oversees our Investigative Services Bureau, and it was about the realignment that we recently announced with respect to our investigative elements and the movement of those from the precincts into a more centralized format. So I'm going to let Deputy Chief Stevens speak on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Deputy Chief Keith Stevens. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces here. So I'll be real brief. Yesterday, as of yesterday, which you may have heard, Chief Drake announced a realignment of our precinct-based investigators, which have been moved to my bureau, the Investigative Services Bureau, and they now fall within the Criminal Investigation Division, thus putting all investigators under one bureau. More specifically, we created new centralized units that would focus specifically on certain crimes, one of which being the burglary unit. Both commercial and residential burglaries will be investigated by this unit, and that'll be countywide. The second would be the organized retail crime unit that will also expand the fraud in the pawn shop unit within that area of investigation. And this will also investigate all shopliftings across the county by this one unit. The third will be non-domestic aggravated assault section. Just think they'll be the ones that do assaults, aggravated assaults that's not related to someone being shot. And then the fourth will be the community crime section. And this section will investigate simple assaults, vandalisms, natural deaths, certain types of other thefts that don't fall into specific specialized units. I'm truly excited about the centralizing of these new units. Our police department has seen unprecedented success over the past couple of years by already doing this in some units, whether it was us centralizing our homicide unit like it used to be. Just last year, our clearance rate in that homicide unit's over 80% when you count the cases that we have warrants on suspects. So 8 out of 10 homicides we know the suspect or have arrested the suspect by having this centralized unit. We centralized the non-lethal shooting section, which specifically investigates any shooting of a person that does not result in the death. They're being housed in the special investigation section, and they're solving more cases than ever before versus when precinct detectives across the city had lower clearance rates investigating those same similar cases. We created the Violent Crimes Division previously that focuses on robberies. We're at a 50-year low in our city, and it's just proven to be impactful with that centralized unit. Lastly, we also created the Vehicle Crime Section that investigates all motor vehicle thefts, which we know is a problem in our city and across America, and theft from motor vehicles. This unit, working in conjunction with our Operation 72 detectives, have lowered motor vehicle theft by almost 150% since January of this year. That's unheard of. Doing tremendous work. So this centralization of the new units allows for better communication within those units, within our department. We're going to have higher clearance rates, quicker suspect identification, and more accountability overall in our investigation. So some may be concerned about precinct precinct commanders no longer having investigators at the precinct. And I would just say that they're going to be updated daily on all of our investigations. If they have questions about specific ones in their precinct, we'll be there to answer that. But I see it's going to be higher clearance rates, just better overall product for our community.
Have you had, was this centralized model something that you all had at one point and then it was decentralized and now you're coming back to centralized?
Yes, ma'am. So I think it was 2004. Chief Surpass came, we decentralized. We made essentially each precinct their own police department. Well, what we learned was, and I'll just use burglary for example, that a suspect burglarizing West Nashville is probably burglarizing South Nashville. They don't know a difference. So when you have 8 separate precinct investigators working a certain crime, they're not in the same room. We're missing key evidence. And I think putting them in under one roof, there's still a lot of them are going to be housed at precincts, so that won't be a concern, but our clearance rates are going to be so much better.
All right, so then I guess the measure of success really is if your clearance rates are dramatically different this time next year, then you'll really know that this is a contributing factor to
Absolutely.
some of that assistance. Okay. Any questions for our Deputy Chief Stevens that's here? All right, seeing none, I really appreciate you coming and explaining that. Thank you so much. Then we'll move on to the Office of Homeless Services, Mr. Clendenning and April Calvin. And I know you've got a presentation and you may have to just really hit the highlights because I'm really interested in the Old Tent City update, kind of and everything that was in the news. But we'd be happy to take your materials too. So if you want to, if there's something really, top notch that you want to hit in your report, that's great. And then we can hear about Tent City.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we've got printed copies. I'll hand those out. Sorry I wasn't here before the meeting, but I got caught up in another meeting, and I'll let Director Calvin speak to the Old Tent City.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Good evening, everyone. April Calvin, Director of the Office of Homeless Services, and I guess I'll give a brief update. Initially, there was conversation of structures that were, two-story structures that's built in Old Tent City that sways when the wind blows, connected to the electricity, and some sewer drainage that goes into the river. And codes, MNPD, and TDOT and myself and Parks all met to discuss those structures. So initially there was information that was shared that it's 6 structures in that entire encampment that was pinpointed that's under the path of the bridge, and some are connected to the stanchions of the bridge, which makes that a little bit unsafe as well. And so that was the initial conversation. And then I think there were some signs that went out by the state that maybe was really confusing to a lot of the people that lived in the camp. It wasn't so much about the structures. It was just a very vague sign that said everyone must leave. So that caused a lot of concern. We're still working with the prioritization team on identifying the next camp that will be slated for closure. So this is two separate conversations. That was not a part of the conversations for the structure. In working to kind of hammer out some of the details, the mayor's office has constructed a 10-day task force, and we had our first meeting yesterday just to understand the needs of the individuals and the needs of all of the Metro departments involved as it relates to the structures.
And can you speak to who's involved in the task force?
Yeah, I would say Parks, myself, MNPD, Codes, EMS, gathering a lot of data from those departments, and a nonprofit, Open Table, along with a couple of members from the actual encampment and a nonprofit that's a part of the prioritization team.
Okay, thank you very much. And so right now they're under, it's a 10-day timeline, and is there the potential out of this 10-day timeline for the working group? And at that point, what's going to happen then? You all will make a decision about the folks that are impacted and kind of what happens next with them? Or do you have any idea, I guess, at this point?
Well, yesterday was our first meeting, and it was the very initial meeting of all parties explaining their concerns. Our next meeting is tomorrow, and maybe we'll have more information after that.
Okay.
The charge from that first meeting was to really understand the needs of the individuals, what supplies would be needed, what safety concerns are there, and also to flesh out the concerns of those that are victims in that camp. MNPD had some startling data on the amount of rapes and sex trafficking and, amount of 911 calls to that camp. So a little bit of both is happening at the same time.
I see. All right, thank you very much. Mr. Clendenning, how about any updates that you want to highlight on your report? And Councilmember Huffman, if you want, can you grab those and distribute? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a lot going on. There's always a lot going on for us. Just some of the things to note is that our supportive services providers have been really working hard. We've been really working with them over the past year. And to the point where now that all the people that are housed in permanent supportive housing through the ARP funds are receiving supportive services. So we're kind of shutting down those referrals, those just not really shutting them down. The referrals have hit this point where everybody's being served. So we're going to be working with the providers to kind of expand their strategies toward other areas of need, like the rescue mission and current encampments. Also, just want to let you know this is NOFO season, and the continuum of care service providers are currently in the throes of 3 different HUD funding opportunities. There's the COC continuum of care, the big funding opportunity. There's a COC builds for permanent supportive housing. It's a one-time deal, so that could be good for the community as well. And a YHGP, which is a youth homelessness demonstration program. And the application was for $3 million for that. And then the other thing to note was a kind of a historic moment. It was that the new chair of the Homelessness Planning Council for the first time is a person with lived expertise, Kenetha Patterson. So that's a big milestone. And along with that, wanted to note that there's engagement with over 130 people with lived experience at this point between the Youth Action Board and the Consumer Advisory Board. So we're really happy about that. That the expertise that they bring and experience they bring is vital to the success of these efforts, and we know that. So we're really encouraged to see that.
Thank you. And I guess one thing I'll just put a tickler kind of related to the NOFO conversation and applications and things of that nature. When all that closes and you all know what the results are, I'd be really interested maybe in coming back to committee and talking about what are the areas, how do we need to strengthen kind of the collective Nashville applications. So I'll just say that into the universe. So I will remember to make a note of it. And then later on, we can have that conversation, after you all have those results back from that process. Anything else you'd like to add for the group?
No, those are the highlights this month, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Clendenning? Okay. I appreciate Mr. Clendenning, you coming, and April Calvin, you as well. Thank you so much. Mark Young, do you have anything that you need to share with anybody? Okay. Well, I will thank you, Mr. Young, for the effort from you all for the September 11th Remembrance event downtown. It's always a really nice event to attend. And so I appreciate everything that you all did to prepare for that. And of course, the IAFF Local 140 as well. So thank you for that. And thank you for inviting us. Last thing I wanted to mention before we adjourn is I did need to pick a new vice chair for our committee. I really appreciate Councilmember Brandon Taylor for serving last year. And so Councilmember Huffman will be our new vice chair for Public Health and Safety. So thank you in advance for everything that I ask you to do, Councilmember Huffman. All right, I appreciate everybody's time. With that, we're adjourned.